Hello, chat. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for entertainment or educational purposes only. So if y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday to all. For those of y'all that hung out over the weekend, we did a gaming stream. We did a quick lecture on Cult 101. And then we played some Cult of the Lamb. Not quite sure we're going to continue playing Cult of the Lamb on stream as much as I'd love to. But, you know, duty calls. And part of being a healthy gamer is not forsaking work for the sake of gaming. So, yeah. Egg Sloops Lamb is asking, what's your personality type? In what frame? Like, are we talking about Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, five-factor model? Like, what system are we talking about? I love the game, though. It seems a little bit... I feel like it's not going to last long, but I think they've done a really good job of integrating, like, you know, basically base building mechanics with a roguelike element. Yeah. I don't know. You should make an alt-account game called Unhealthy Gamer. Yeah, so Reindeer Police is saying, my nephew sits watching TikTok and YouTube shorts constantly. I feel like things are like this are just setting him up for attention issues, which he does seem to display. Absolutely. So I think part of the reason that so we're going to be talking about ADHD TikToks today. But part of the reason that I think you're seeing so much traction about ADHD on platforms like TikTok and stuff is because there are, I think all of these like short form content things are actually like training our attention to be shorter. So there's a reason why, if you look at it, like, I don't know if this is statistically correct or not, but, you know, we've worked with between probably around 400 content creators at this point. At HG through our content creator coaching program and just through interviews and stuff like that, workshops and whatnot. And I think that the rate of ADHD amongst content creators is like way higher than the average population. And I think what we're sort of seeing is that in some cases, like that short attention span, like allows you to make short form content better. And then when you make when you consume a lot of short form content, what your brain realizes is like, oh, we don't need to hold our attention for longer than 60 seconds. And furthermore, as the content becomes more and more interesting and more algorithmic, not only is it 60 seconds, it's 60 seconds that are highly, highly, like, for lack of a better term, dopaminergic. That's probably not very scientific, but, and so what that sort of means is that I don't have to force myself to stay engaged, right? Like, the engagement comes from the content. So it's like, it's kind of hands off. It's like autopilot for my brain. And then the more that we drive on autopilot, the earlier we start driving on autopilot, the worse our ability to drive becomes. It's kind of like now with the generation of GPSs, like no one knows like directions anymore, right? Like people being able to navigate by north, south, east, west is like, we're losing that capability, which some people will lament. But I think that's just part of what happens as humans, right? So as society grows and changes, like we adapt with it. And our brain is really good at sort of saying, hey, if we don't need it, like we're not going to spend time maintaining it. The Shoodle is asking, how is the diagnostic criteria different for ADHD regulations versus BPD? Very different, wildly different. So the first thing is that BPD is a personality disorder. So the diagnosis, it's like part of who you are, right? So it's not like it's baked into your personality structure. So that can change over time because remember, personalities can change over time, right? But it doesn't mean you're doomed with it for the rest of your life. But it's like, so the criteria are a lot more longitudinal in nature. So for personality diagnosis, we usually need like 6 months of kind of evaluation and things like that, right? To make a really good diagnosis. And ADHD and like mood dysregulation, there may be some similarities in the brain, but I think it really depends on sort of what's causing the fluctuation in mood. So with ADHD, mood dysregulation, with BPD, it's going to be a lot more like interpersonal issues, fear of abandonment or things like that are going to cause mood dysregulations. Whereas with ADHD, it seems like there's just less ability to regulate and control your mood in your brain. So the things that would normally upset anyone with someone with ADHD and mood dysregulation, they would just be upset more quickly and more likely to be upset, less likely to regulate. Whereas in BPD, we're really talking about interpersonal issues as the source of mood dysregulation. PsychoDead93, wow. Subscribed for 30 months. That's crazy, dude. That's like 2.5 years. So it's been wild to think that we've been streaming that long. Oh, wrong stream category. Okay, let's fix that. Thank you for letting us know, chat. That's what happens. Pigeon, 19 months, 1.5 years. I look out for y'all. Y'all look out for me. I much appreciate it. Let's see. Edit stream info. Category. Let's change it to just chatting. There we go. All right. Stream info updated successfully. Dr. K has leveled up. I leveled up my stream info updating capabilities. So Calamity AU is asking, Dr. K, I want to thank you for all you do. Just wondering if my psychiatrist putting me down for drug screening after already giving me prescription medication could be targeting me for being on welfare. Also made a lot of value-based judgments, according to my psychologist, including saying I didn't have anxiety. Thoughts, was she unprofessional or no? I can't really comment. I need a lot more details to decide if that person was unprofessional or not. And generally speaking, I wouldn't even comment on that. What I will say is that drug screening is basically standard of care in a lot of situations for prescribing psychiatric medications. So I think this is where a lot of people will feel like drug screening is like punitive in nature, but like a lot of times it's just standard of care. So some people just do that regularly in their practice. So I wouldn't, we can't really say like, I don't know if it's punitive. I don't know if it's standard for them or not. If you have a question about your psychiatrist recommending a drug screen or wanting a drug screen, the best thing to do is just ask them, can you help me understand why you're doing this? Like why you want this? What's the significance of this? For people who want connect the dots hints, I don't know what to tell y'all. Like, I don't know the answers to this. I'm just as clueless as y'all are. So, I don't know. How do I showcase progress? I'm not sure how to do that. First stream I've caught in a few months, listening while machining on the mill. Mr. Ren, Chiefy, welcome. I'm not sure is that modern day slang for something like machining on the mill? Does that mean grinding your gerund, or are you like actually like a machine worker at a mill? Which is awesome. Actually, okay, awesome, dude. I don't know, man. So, like, I'm terrified that one of these days, like, I can't keep up with the lingo with the kids. Right? Like, machining, it's like many years ago. So, when I got out of touch with the children, I've been out of touch for a long time, but one of them was like, so I'll tell y'all, like, when I sort of gave up on keeping up was teach me how to Dougie. Y'all are probably even too young to remember this. But it's like, hey, do you know how to Dougie? It's like, I don't even know. What does that mean? And at some point, my secret fear is that I'm going to say some phrase that I don't realize has like cancellation, getting canceled vibes. But whatever. I think I changed. Oh, did I not change it properly? Okay. Category, just chatting. I don't see the. Did I not change it properly? We'll see. Anyway, shall we get to stuff? It says just chatting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it was on it because, you know, I randomly streamed on Saturday morning for a little bit too. That was fun though. Amim is asking, how can I ask Dr. K something? I don't know. I think you just type it in chat, and then depending on how bad my ADD is in the moment, I will actually answer it or not answer it. It's pinned in the Discord channel. Okay, let's see if we can figure this out. The Miro board? Is that what we're talking about? Let's try to figure this out. Let's see if we can... Okay, I may not need to do this. Okay, we can just look at it right here. Okay, so let's look at this. We can show progress, sure. Let's take a look. All right, so here's the Miro board. And I don't know how to, there we go. Okay. Wow, this is intense. Photo forensics. Wow, someone is looking at the modification date to see if something was part of the clue. That's next level. I don't even know how are they getting that shot. This is creepy. I don't know how people are even seeing this. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is not part of the clues. I'm pretty sure this is just, this is not part of the clues. I'm like, pretty sure. Okay. What is this? One-on-one? This is intense. So, failed. What is failed? Oh no, dude. We failed because enough people didn't clean their rooms? Oh no, chat, y'all need to clean your room. Swap it challenge, phase 3. Your next hint, shame. Is that a Game of Thrones reference? What is this? Okay, this is wild. Now we're lost again. Dude, this is, it's too late? Okay, well, that's hype. Cool that people are doing this. Very cool, actually. Yeah, it's, so this is the thing, like, y'all crushed the last 2 challenges. So I think, like, the community folks, like Tech Teller and crew, like all the awesome mods and stuff, they're, like, up in the game. Like, this is, you know, sometimes you gotta wipe. It's like leveling up. You know, this community can do a lot. So I don't think they're pulling their punches anymore. Yeah. So Captain the Real One's asking, Doc, if my brain thinks that I have to talk to you because I believe you are the most suitable person to help me and anyone else will just be settling, what would you do to calm this phenomenon? It's been troubling me for a while. It's to understand that I'm not actually like... So here's the thing. The standards of our profession, the reason that we have standards of professions is to guarantee a certain amount of minimum competence. And I think that, like, sometimes people have something that I call kind of like magic pill syndrome, where they think only one thing will help them. But if you just look at it, like, there are almost no cases in which only one particular thing will save you. In fact, that you have to dig into why you think that I'm the only one that can save you, because the magic pill syndrome is reaching for a perfection, is reaching for a fantasy. And even if that fantasy becomes a reality, like it's not like it's impossible for someone to be perfect, right? It's impossible for anyone to be the magic pill. And so even if that happened, it wouldn't help. And then you'd continue looking for a magic pill. So I think this is where, like, I know we don't want to settle, but like settling is the answer, right? So like the question is, what's important to you? Like, what's wrong with settling if it gets you to where you need to go? So it's about ego and all kinds of other stuff. But good question, though. I have a fever and I'm struggling to meditate. Any tips? I thought we've explained this. You don't need to meditate, especially like you shouldn't meditate. You certainly shouldn't teach meditation while you're sick. There may be exceptions. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but it's okay to not meditate and just give your mind and body rest. Okay, let's get started. All righty. Let's see what we've got here today. Okay, we're going to take a look at ADHD TikToks. So let's take a look.
ADHD hacks that I wish I knew sooner.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me over. What do you want to do? Oh, I invited you over to be my body double for the day. What? Well, I was hoping that you kind of just sit there while I got some stuff done. So you just want me to sit here while you do stuff? Not help or anything? No, okay, just you being here is gonna help me out a lot, but you can help yourself to anything in the fridge. Why are all your condiments in the vegetable drawer,
good.
but your vegetables are in the condiment? Like, what are you doing? Well, if the vegetables were in the drawer, then it'd kind of turn into like a out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, and I would never use them. Kinda makes sense, but it also kinda feels like a sin. I'm telling you, it works for me. Hey, don't put that down. What? Put it away. Oh, don't put it down. Put it away. Don't put it down. Put it away. Don't put it down. Put it away.
ADHD hacks.
All right. So this is actually really interesting. I like this for a couple of reasons. There's one, we're going to rewatch the first one, okay? And then there are a couple of really interesting principles that we're going to share, which are really good. So this is something that a lot of people don't know.
ADHD hacks that I wish I knew sooner.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me over. What do you want to do? Oh, I invited you over to be my body double for the day.
Okay.
What?
Let's
well, I was hoping
talk
that you
about
kind of
this for a
just
second.
sit there while I got some stuff done. So you just want me to sit here while you do stuff? Not help or anything? No, okay, just you be.
All right, so let's talk about this. So this is kind of interesting. So people with ADHD, so this person's basically saying, oh, like, I will be more productive if you come to my house and you sit down and you don't need to help me. But if you're around, it'll help. Okay, so let's understand, this is actually true. Let's understand the scientific principle behind it. And furthermore, once we understand the scientific principle, like you may be thinking, okay, so if having someone around will help me do my work, but like, what if I don't have someone around? How can I take advantage of this even if I don't have someone around? So this is really important to understand. So let's understand a little bit about why this helps people with ADHD. Okay, so let's say that this is your optimal level of functioning. Let's say that this is the level of stimulation, okay, in your environment. So what happens if you take a kid with ADHD and you put him in an empty room? What does the kid do? If a kid with ADHD is in a completely empty room with no stimulation, so you start them over there, what do they start to do? Do ADHD symptoms increase or decrease? So this worsens ADHD. So what you'll find with a kid in an empty room is that they'll like move around, they'll fidget, they'll like whatever. And so what they're actually doing in this situation is increasing their stimulation, right? So they're self-stimulating. They start doing stuff. So if I add, let's say, a couple of toys, so I give them moderate stimulation, what happens to their ADHD? Their ADHD improves. And if I put a kid in a room full of tons and tons of toys with flashing lights and all kinds of other stuff, very high stimulation, what happens? worsens ADHD. Okay? So if you look at a neurotypical brain, so this may be the optimal level of stimulation for people with ADHD. The key thing is that if you look at neurotypical people, what you tend to find is that the optimal level of stimulation is probably over here. It's lower than it is with ADHD. So even if you put a neurotypical person in a room with like nothing, they will also self-stimulate, explore, etc. But if you put them with like as many toys as the ADHD person needs, that'll be overstimulation from them. And what they're going to need to do is actually kind of decrease their level of stimulation. So this is why, like, people with ADHD may study with music, things like that. So what does having another person do? It essentially increases the baseline level of stimulation to reach your optimal level for like performance and being able to do work. There are also studies that show, so there are a couple of other interesting principles here. So white noise is another good example of this, that people with ADHD, some of them who listen to white noise will actually be able to focus better. And it works on this same principle over here. A couple of other interesting side effects of this, if you're trying to get people with ADHD to meditate, does anyone know one tip that you can tell someone who has ADHD if they have trouble meditating? What can you do? Anyone know? Meditate with your eyes open. So what does that do? It's kind of interesting, right? Because we tell most people to close their eyes when they meditate. But in this case, if you have someone with ADHD, sometimes if they meditate with their eyes open, they'll actually be able to focus better, because eyes open will increase their baseline level of stimulation to the optimal level. So kind of interesting TikTok. Turns out it is also correct, right? But if you don't have a body double, if you don't have someone who can come over, there may be some baseline level of stimulation that you can increase, like white noise or listening to music or things like that, that can also work. Okay?
Being here is going to help me out a lot, but you can help yourself to anything and I would never use them.
So
kind of makes sense, but it also
this also sort of makes sense, right? Because people with ADHD will be very activated by stimuli. So if you see the vegetables, you'll like open the thing and you'll be like, oh yeah, I have vegetables. And so it's kind of like building your environment to be suited towards your attention span.
kind of feels like a sin. I'm telling you, it works for me. Hey,
Now,
don't put that down.
Here's where things get tricky.
What? Put it away. Oh, don't put it down. Put it away. Don't put it down. Put it away.
So I think this is great advice for keeping your place clean. Here's the problem with that. So if we think about the brain, what is the part of our brain that allows us to put it down instead of putting it away? So let's think about this, okay? What is the sequence of events from putting it down to putting it away? So the first thing that you've got to do, and I'll kind of ask y'all this question. So when people with ADHD put things down, are they aware when they put things down? So the first problem is that there's a lack of awareness when you put something down, right? That's why people forget. People with ADHD don't forget. There's no problem with their memory. Their problem is actually with their inability to attend. It never sinks in the first place. It's not a problem with retrieval. So if this kind of makes sense, if we think about memory, something goes into our memory and then we recall it. And so what happens is when I ask myself, where are my keys? I can't recall. So I assume that I have a problem with my memory. I have forgetfulness. It's not forgetfulness. It's that you weren't paying attention when you put them down in the first place. So there's nothing down here. This is empty, right? Because this is actually where the problem is in ADHD. So this is challenging because putting it away instead of putting it down is a fantastic idea. Love it. The challenge is that is actually twice as hard for ADHD people as it is for neurotypical people because they have a lack of attention. They don't realize they're putting it down in the first place. The second thing is, even if they do realize it, they have to restrain an impulse to put it down and then use goal-directed behavior, right? I have to stop myself And then like I have to plan and execute, okay, I should like go over here and put it over there. So if you kind of think about that, these are actually all the weaknesses of a brain with ADHD. These are where we know they're, functional impairments. So there's a lack of attention, right? I'm not paying attention. There's impulsivity in ADHD. So I have to restrain an impulse, which is what people with ADHD sometimes struggle with. And then I have to use my frontal lobe to direct myself in the right direction. So this is fantastic advice. I strongly recommend everyone try it, but recognize that it's not going to be as easy as it appears on the TikTok. And in fact, if you have ADHD, I mean, this is hard enough if you're neurotypical, but it's going to be an uphill battle if you've got ADHD. Still good. Good tip, though. All right. I have a feeling this one's loud, so.
Entirely possible that they have real consciousness. It's entirely possible that they have real consciousness.
So this can be accurate, right? So that the brains of people with ADHD are loud. So let me ask you something. Is your brain louder or quieter in high stimuli or low stimuli environments? So let's take a look, right? So let's think about this. If the stimulus level is high versus low, what is the volume in your head? Okay? So what we tend to find is that when the stimulus level is high, the volume in your head is going to be low. And when the stimulus level is low, the volume in your head is going to be high. So this goes back to this other principle where basically our brain and people with ADHD will auto-compensate for a lack of stimulus by increasing particular thoughts. You got to be a little bit careful because if you get too high in terms of stimulus, you'll kind of get overwhelmed. But same general principle. So if things are too high, if things are too loud in your head, just think a little bit about the stimulus. And I think it's kind of interesting because I've seen these kinds of TikToks before. In every one of these TikToks, what is the person doing? They're just sitting there and quiet.
It's entirely possible.
Right? You never see these TikToks with people like eating at a cafe. They're usually like at home without other people around, which is what happens. So your brain will try to overstimulate. Okay.
The plus button if you want. Things I thought everyone experienced before I found out about adult ADHD. Everything is so loud and that pisses me off. Turns out you can live life on a lower volume, and getting very overwhelmed by sounds in places like grocery stores is just another symptom. I'm not lazy. Do you ever have a task to do and you're kind of just sat there in your head thinking about the task but not getting the task started? That's ADHD paralysis, and oh my god, it's frustrating as fuck. It's not normal to have to remind yourself to pay attention when someone's talking to you. Often if someone's telling me a story halfway through, it'll sound like they're talking Simlish. And it's not that I'm being rude and not listening, it's just my brain's somewhere else, like always. So that's just a few things. Let me know if you want a part 2 and press the plus button if you want to follow my ADHD journey from diagnosis to medication.
Okay, so there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. Let's just go through and
things I thought everyone experienced
touch on them
before
one
I
at a
found
time.
out about adult ADHD. Everything is so loud and
So this once again goes back to what we're talking about sort of distractibility in stimuli. So the key thing about ADHD is that when people have ADHD, one of the symptoms, one of the diagnostic criteria is distractibility. And so what does that mean, distractibility? It means that my attention is more easily shifted from one thing to another. So subjectively, the way that people experience that with ADHD is that if you look at a neurotypical person, if I'm sitting at a cafe and I'm talking to someone across from me, my brain is able to drown out and suppress external stimuli better than someone with ADHD. So since I'm less distractible, my subjective experience is that all I'm going to hear is the person who's sitting across from me. If I have ADHD, however, since I'm more distractible, my brain is less able to suppress the other things around me. And so what that'll sort of manifest as is the sound will subjectively feel louder than it would for a neurotypical person. So here I am trying to focus on things, and there's so much loud noise. And in the case of a neurotypical person, when something breaks through that sort of suppression shield, for lack of a better term, that's going to correlate with higher volume, right? So if I'm sitting at a cafe and someone starts yelling, that'll break through my suppression shield and it'll sort of gain my attention. But in the case of ADHD, our suppression shield is a little bit lower, so it feels like things are louder.
And that pisses me off. Turns out you can live life on a lower volume, and getting very overwhelmed by sounds in places like grocery stores is just another symptom. I'm not
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how can you live life on a lower volume. So there are a couple of different things that you can do. So we know that, for example, this person at the end talks about medication. So this is kind of interesting, but medication for ADHD, it's kind of weird, right? Because like if we think about medication for ADHD, like my mind is moving too fast. And if I think about a stimulant, doesn't that cause my mind to move faster? So if I'm like a neurotypical person and I drink caffeine, my mind is going to start moving faster, right? I'm not going to be as sluggish. So sometimes people get kind of confused because how does like stimulant medication calm down the mind in people who have ADHD? So it turns out that actually what happens, if you look at the brain of someone with ADHD, we have our frontal lobes. And our frontal lobes actually send inhibitory signals to other parts of our brain, like our nucleus accumbens. So this is where we inhibit impulses. We also inhibit emotions through the amygdala, right? So what happens when we actually have, when we add stimulant medication, is we actually stimulate our inhibitory function of the brain. We stimulate our brakes, which is why we slow down, which is why we're able to pay attention. And so if you want to live life quieter, essentially what you need to do is increase your ability to attend to a particular stimuli and not be quite as distractible, which you can do through strengthening the frontal lobes. So meditation also works for this. Okay?
lazy. Do you ever have a task to do and you're kind of just sat there in your head thinking about the task but not getting the task started? That's ADHD paralysis. And
so here's my concern with this. Is I'm noticing this trend in a lot of ADHD TikToks where people are really, really overgeneralizing. So, you know, like this is a 52-second TikTok that has 3 concepts in it. And so what I'm noticing is that people are just like really, really overgeneralizing. This may not be ADHD paralysis. And furthermore, ADHD paralysis is an umbrella term that means a lot of different things and has a lot of different discrete neuroscientific kind of principles. The key thing is that we know that people with ADHD are more prone to procrastination, but even procrastination has different kinds of sources, right? So sometimes we procrastinate because we're afraid of the consequence. Sometimes we procrastinate because we're perfectionistic. Sometimes we procrastinate in the case of ADHD, which is more vulnerable to people with ADHD, because we don't know how to operationalize the task. It's an executive function problem. So executive function is the part of our brain that plans and executes tasks. The challenge is that if we kind of go to the brain of ADHD, you know, when what we call ADHD paralysis may have 3 different origins in the brain. So it could be frontal lobe problem. It could be limbic system problem. So we know that, for example, we have difficulty restraining our emotions. We know that emotions influence the behavior of people with ADHD more. But is it essentially emotions controlling us and that's why we're paralyzed? Or do we literally not know how to get started because we feel so overwhelmed? Those are 2 very different things with very different solutions. And the problem with these phrases like ADHD paralysis is that if I look up solutions for ADHD paralysis, like it's going to be all kinds of different stuff, but discretely what's going on in the brain is going to be very, very different. By the way, if y'all are interested in the neuroscience, the ADHD guide that we have coming out in 14 days has the most neuroscience heavy stuff that we've done, because I do think there's a lot to understand about different parts of your brain and targeting solutions towards your particular problem. And the reason that we go into that detail is because what I'm seeing as we go into more short form content is people just call something ADHD paralysis. And there are even studies on ADHD paralysis, but what we sort of realize if you look at those studies is that there are a lot of different mechanisms, and the solutions need to be tailored to where the problem actually is.
Oh
And
my
then he
God,
talks
it's
a little bit
frustrating.
about social stuff, right?
Often if someone's telling
So let's take a look at this.
to remind yourself to pay attention when someone's talking to you. Often if someone's telling me a story halfway through or sound like they're talking Simlish, and it's not that I'm being rude and not listening, it's just my brain's somewhere else, like always. So that's just a few things. Let me know if you
So I
want
think
a
the next
part.
one is also a little bit about relationships. So let's take a look, and then we'll talk about this. This is really important.
So let me get this straight. It's actually harder to maintain friendships and relationships if you have ADHD. Yeah. Because people with ADHD have object permanence like infants have when playing the game of peekaboo. So if you don't see people for a long time, you forget they exist. Yeah, even the ones I love and care about the most. And you also have emotional permanence on top of that. So if those people aren't constantly reassuring you that they love and care about you, you assume that they hate you? Yes, and due to my intense subconscious fear of rejection, I'll actually wind up completely socially isolating myself. But doesn't that make your depression a lot worse? Also, yes. So, like, how do you have any friends? Honestly, I have no idea. I'm so fucking annoying.
Okay. So there's some things I like about this and some things about this that seem very incorrect to me. So on the one hand, I think this person starts out strong, right? So
Get this straight. It's actually harder to maintain friendships and relationships if you have ADHD.
this is correct. So there's actually research that goes into this, which we'll dive into in a second. But then I think this is the other problem with a lot of these TikToks is that they start to conflate a lot of different things. Okay? So ADHD has nothing to do with like being sensitive to rejection. That's not a diagnostic feature of ADHD. Now, are a lot of people with ADHD sensitive to rejection? Sure. But it's not due to ADHD. And why is that kind of dangerous? Let me put it to y'all this way. Okay, let's just finish watching this for a second.
Yeah. Because people with ADHD have object permanence like
Okay, so we just got to list this. Object permanence. Okay, that's weird.
infants have when playing the game of peekaboo. So if you don't see people for a long time, you forget they exist.
I don't think that's
Yeah,
accurate.
even the ones I love and care about the most. And you also have emotional permanence on top of that. So if those
I've never heard the phrase emotional permanence. I don't know what that means. Is that like a new thing? TikTok is too loud?
people aren't constantly reassuring you that they love and care about you, you assume that they hate you?
Assume that they hate you. This has nothing to do with ADHD. Sorry. Okay, let's keep going.
You? Yes, and due to my intense subconscious fear of rejection, I'll actually wind up completely socially isolating myself.
Okay, intense fear of rejection. All right. And this makes your depression worse. All right, so there's a lot of good stuff here, but there's some stuff that yeah, sorry for turning it up. There's a lot of stuff here that we've got to really talk about for a second, okay? So I'm pretty sure people with ADHD have object permanence. So like, what is the principle of object permanence? Let's talk about this. So object permanence is the awareness that things that I'm not directly perceiving actually continue to exist even though I don't see them. So this is, I don't know if y'all understand this, but the reason that peekaboo is so fun for babies is because they don't have object permanence. So when you play peekaboo and I go like this and you can't see my face, that means that I no longer exist. So when you play peekaboo with a baby, you are literally like flashing in and out of existence in their mind. So they're like, wow, that person just completely disappeared from existence. And now that they come back, they're like popped into existence again. It's wild, right? That's why babies love peekaboo. And if you kind of think about it, like peekaboo stops getting fun at some point, right? And why does peekaboo stop getting fun? Because people develop object permanence. Now, as far as I know, I mean, I could be wrong. Like I'm not, I haven't read all of the scientific papers out there, and who knows, maybe this person has looked at a bunch of science on object permanence and has discovered that people with ADHD don't have object permanence, which would blow my mind. Because if that were true, that would mean like, if I had ADHD and like I didn't see my car, that would mean that I no longer realized that my car existed. Like people wouldn't be able to drive to work because they wouldn't understand that a car exists. The fridge would be like completely empty all the time. It just doesn't make sense. Then they talk about emotional permanence, which means that, you know, if people like don't like you, you assume that they hate you. And this is where I think what's starting to happen is they're conflating a lot of things with ADHD. And here's why this is important. So if ADHD causes fear of rejection, why is this like kind of dangerous to do? Because it's true. This is good because it captures a lot of the experience of people with ADHD, which we'll get to why this happens. But here's what bothers me about it. If I treat this, okay? If I treat someone's ADHD, their fear of rejection does not go away. But if it were due to ADHD, it would go away, right? So if like ADHD causes inattention, and then I treat the ADHD, then this would get better. We'd actually like fix this. Does that make sense? So this is why it's really important to not conflate certain symptoms of ADHD with like, and be clear on what you're treating. Because if someone comes in with a fear of rejection, I treat their ADHD, their fear of rejection is not going to go away. This is going to have to be dealt with independently. So let's understand a couple of things about ADHD in social situations. There have been studies that demonstrate all kinds of really interesting things. So ADHD leads to inattention. There's a whole video about this in the guide, by the way, that walks through this, okay? So ADHD leads to inattention. What does inattention do? Inattention means I can't pay attention in conversations. So if I can't pay attention in conversations, I'm going to have difficulty with social relationships. Okay, so there are studies that show that kids with ADHD are invited to birthday parties less than neurotypical kids. So it starts really, really young. If all of my friends are talking about Pokemon and I'm 7 years old and like I'm not paying attention, I don't know what they're talking about, I can't participate in the conversation, and then suddenly I start talking about candy bars, like everyone's going to look at me like I'm a weirdo because like we're not talking about candy bars. And then at other times, like one kid is really, really upset because they got bullied on you know, on the playground. And then I start talking about Pokemon because I'm so excited. Kids are going to kind of look at me like I'm a weirdo. And then that's going to lead to difficulty with social relationships. So literally, there have been studies that show that kids with ADHD get invited to birthday parties less. So what this means is that this inattention then leads to social isolation. This social isolation can contribute to depression. We'll share some interesting statistics with y'all in a second. This depression then leads to fear of rejection and all this other stuff that the person is talking about. Okay? But this is really important to understand, is that this is not a direct consequence of the ADHD. There are like a lot of steps in the middle. And here's what I've seen like as a clinician, is that you can treat the ADHD and it'll improve. You know, this stuff will get better. But this is the whole point, is that when you're working with someone with ADHD and depression, which they allude to at the end, this has a completely different treatment. This is not going to get touched by treating ADHD. Especially this stuff. So even some of the social isolation, like this, you could argue will improve some as you start to like, you know, get better. So this is what's kind of interesting, is that if you look at people who have ADHD and depression, which by the way, there's a very high comorbidity, this is what you find. So for people who have both, if you start with depression as a kid, there's a 3% chance that you will have ADHD as an adult. If you start with ADHD as a kid, there is a 70% chance that you will have depression as an adult. There is a huge causative link here, which is very different. Does that make sense? So this is what's really important about this, is like your fear of rejection and abandonment isn't a part of ADHD. It's like a separate process that's a consequence of usually growing up with untreated ADHD. It's huge. Once again, we go into all this. This is all in the guide in a bunch of detail. So if y'all are really curious about that. So how does it lead to depression? Let's just give you a quick spoilerino. So people with ADHD have lower academic achievement, lower social connections. There's even evidence, like we talked about the birthday parties, teachers give them less attention. Teachers give less negative attention. I mean, sorry, less positive attention. Right? Because like you have trouble in school, so they'll give you attention, but it's like because you're screwing up. They're not going to encourage you and they'll say like, oh, you're so good at this, like good job. I think you should go to a honors class next year because you've really got talent in it. They don't get this kind of positive attention. Lower academic achievement leads to worse educational performance. This leads to worse job prospects. And then, by the way, difficulty with social connections also leads to worse job prospects. So there's studies that show that inability to participate in work social situations, like a neurotypical person, leads to lower advancement, lower wages, lower promotions, etc. So this kind of stuff, and then you end up sort of like being behind other people in life, which in turn leads to depression. So the two are I understand why this person is conflating the two, because oftentimes people with ADHD will experience both of these things. The problem is that we've got to be a little bit sophisticated here and recognize that these are actually two separate processes, because fixing the ADHD isn't naturally going to make the fear of rejection go away. Speaking of work. Yeah, so this is pretty accurate too. So let's kind of talk about this, right? So there's like number one is, what's number one? Can we just move it without it playing? Okay, oversharing in team meetings. This is common. So oftentimes that impulsivity is going to lead to oversharing. Careless mistakes and getting distracted are also, there's a higher level of distractibility. Careless mistakes is due to inattention, right? That's what we mean by careless. So it's like a mistake that like you weren't paying attention, so you kind of like delete something that you shouldn't have. So also now this is really interesting. So taking on too much responsibility is where we really have to tunnel down. So there are a couple of different reasons why people with ADHD do this. One is that they feel like they're trying to make up for the other stuff, right? So if I make a careless mistake, people think less of me. And what do I have to do to fix that? Oh, this is loud? Dude, it's already so low. Okay. So when we take on too much responsibility, sometimes it's because we feel like we screwed up at work, so we have to make up for it. And then what we end up doing is signing ourselves up for like more stuff, which we are actually kind of digging ourselves into a hole, because we kind of make it a careless mistake once. If we take on more responsibility, it doesn't mean that we're not going to make a careless mistake again. So you've got to be really careful about taking on what I would call a compensatory responsibility. Don't take on responsibility to make up for something in the past, because you're just kind of really setting yourself up for failure there. The other reason that people take on too much responsibility is because of impulsivity, right? So remember that in ADHD, our frontal lobes are not as good at planning and executing tasks, which means that we're not really good at sequencing out, okay, I'm going to sign up for the project. What does that mean? Because when my brain assesses risk, assesses resource management, it's like, oh, that's easy. I can take care of that super easy. And so sometimes we'll sign up for stuff and we don't really realize what we're getting into. The other reason that gets really complicated is part of the reason that we will sometimes sign up for really difficult tasks is because sometimes with people with ADHD, you know that you can actually get a ton of stuff done in 2 hours. Like there was a project at work that was taking other people a week, but like you banged it out in like 1 day. So sometimes you do have those shining successes, which your brain is aware of. And so it'll sign up for stuff because if you can get all the stars aligned, you can knock it out of the park. So this is a really good one that goes into a little bit more, some subtleties there, but good. Only working on projects due tomorrow. Yeah, that's where, I don't know how to say this, but let's take a quick look at this. So when people have ADHD, so we have a tendency to get overwhelmed, right? So let's say this is let's say this is like panic, and this is effort. So what we essentially do is we'll like use panic to increase our effort. So sometimes people with ADHD will like use last minute panic as something like they need that stress level to get their brain to focus. So maybe this is actually focus is a better thing for this y-axis. But this is really common. And then always getting sidetracked. Yeah, that's distractibility. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Okay.
Big bags, listen up, Billy Band, take them net, break them back, right back, you know you better with this. If it's up, then it's up, then it's up, then it's up. If it's up, then it's up, then it's up, then it's up.
So that's distractibility, inattention. Okay, so there are a couple of things that are kind of interesting here that they talk about. So the first one is still pretty loud. Dude, this is, I hate this TikTok, dude. Why is everything so friggin' loud? So that's inattention. So this is important. So because of the consequences of inattention and distractibility, sometimes people with ADHD do actually like end up working more, right? So like they spend more time trying to work. This is why if you look at things like CBT for ADHD, even part of the clinical treatment for ADHD and psychotherapy actually doesn't involve talking about your feelings. A portion of what's actually really, really effective is organizational skills and focusing skills. So that too we dig into a lot because that's not actually, I mean, it's a part of clinical treatment, but it's not like learning how to use a calendar is not exclusive to psychotherapy, right? But it turns out that if you teach people with ADHD some of these organizational techniques, it'll boost their productivity and they won't actually have to work extra. So excessive disagreements and arguments with coworkers, this is kind of tricky. So sometimes people with ADHD, this is true of some people, but not others. So a couple of things to think about. One is whether you have kind of the emotional dysregulation subtype with ADHD. The other issue is that sometimes you're kind of just not paying attention, right? Or like you're not able to articulate what you're kind of saying. And that can lead to things like disagreements. Okay, let's make sure that the volume is turned way down before we start this.
If you have ADHD and you've been in a relationship where everything was great in the beginning, y'all were spending every single day together, you were doing all these activities, and over time, the effort dropped, right? And you didn't feel any differently about the person, but you just kind of got a little bit busier, right? Or you didn't have as much time to dedicate to doing certain things, then I want you to know you're not alone, right? With the ADHD brain, a lot of times the things that fascinate us are things that, you know, either have like a time limit on it, there's a deadline coming up, or things that are new and exciting, right? Or something that's unpredictable, something that keeps us curious and keeps us going. So a lot of times in relationships is that same exact way, right? And what you can do to help prevent this love bombing sort of thing, right? It's not love bombing, but it almost seems like
what is this guy
that.
talking
One thing
about?
that you can do is to set boundaries in the beginning, right? Make sure that you're taking some time to spend with yourself as you meet this new person, and pace yourself. So that way you're not letting somebody, you know, feel that hurt at the end when the dopamine wears off, right? So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Wait, what? Let me just make sure I understand this.
If you have ADHD and you've been in a relationship where everything was great in the beginning, y'all
Okay,
were spending every
so
single day
relationships are
together,
great at the beginning.
you were doing all these activities, and over time, the effort dropped, right? And you didn't feel any differently about the person, but
Effort dropped.
you just kind of got a little bit busier, right? Or you didn't have as much time to dedicate to doing certain things, then I want you to know you're not alone, right?
Busier.
With the ADHD brain, a lot of times the things that fascinate us are things that, you know, either have like a time limit on it, there's a deadline coming up, or things that are new and exciting, right? Or something that's unpredictable, something that keeps us curious and keeps us going. So a lot of times in relationships is that same exact way, right? And what you can do to help prevent this love bombing sort of thing, right?
Okay,
it's not
this
love
is where he
bombing,
loses
but it
me.
almost seems like that. One thing that you can do is to set boundaries in the beginning, right? Make sure
Boundaries
that you're
around
taking some
what?
time to spend with yourself as you
Spend
meet this new
some
person,
time with
and
yourself?
pace yourself. So that way you're not
I'm so confused by this. I don't understand the chain of, okay, so like sometimes relationships are, So like, I understand some pieces of it, but I don't understand all of it. So like, okay, let's just start at the top. So new relationships are exciting. And then over time, they get less exciting. I don't see what that has to do with ADHD. Over time, sometimes we get busier. Also, sometimes we don't. So this kind of makes sense, right? Because he talks about the ADHD brain, like oftentimes where we do things that are more time dependent. That makes a lot of sense. We just talked about procrastination and panic. And we prefer things that are new, exciting, but I don't think that's specific to ADHD. I mean, sure, like people are more distractible, but this is, I don't understand the love bombing. Can someone explain that to me? Like, what does love bombing have to do with this? Okay, so he's equating the end of the honeymoon phase with ADHD. And then setting boundaries, pacing yourself. I'm not saying the dude is wrong. I'm just saying I feel like there's just a lot of regular stuff about relationships here. And like, I feel like people talk about boundary setting, but like I set what boundaries? Pace yourself, like don't hang out with the person as much? Is that what they're saying? I don't understand what they're saying. I'm not saying it's wrong. It makes sense, right? So some of the stuff that he's saying makes sense. Like there's, the pressure on time limit. So maybe like when something isn't new and exciting, like, there's no pressure to maintain the relationship. So you kind of fall out of it like that. That makes sense to me. I don't understand the love bombing and the boundary setting. I don't know what to say about this. I feel like there's, maybe another 30 seconds to really draw out that chain would have been more useful, at least for me. Someone's asking, how do you cure ADHD? So a couple of things to understand. So a lot of psychiatric illnesses, we don't really believe, or in our model of disease, we don't really believe that, or I mean, you can sort of cure them, but like we don't really know that they can be cured. So some of this may be somewhat organic and somewhat, when I say somewhat permanent, take that with a grain of salt. So here's why. So we know, for example, that the majority of people who experience one depressive episode in their life, I think this is accurate, the most common number of depressive episodes for people who experience depressive episodes is one. So the majority of people that we're aware of, maybe it's not a majority, it could be a plurality, but like a lot of people will just experience one depressive episode and it'll like never come back. So that number is actually quite high. And I may be wrong on that statistic, but I think it's still quite high, even if it's not the most. So does that mean that that person has been cured of depression? Like, we're not really sure. In terms of ADHD, so this is really interesting. So when you go through psychotherapy for ADHD, we do know that some portion of people who go through psychotherapy for ADHD will 2 years out, even after 2 years after completing psychotherapy, many of them will not experience any negative impacts from their ADHD. So that's kind of interesting. So that's not true of medication. So what we sort of know is that a lot of times people with ADHD will essentially develop adaptive strategies. They'll start to structure their life in a particular way to where the ADHD no longer impacts them. A good example of this was the whole vegetables in the side drawer and condiments in the vegetable drawer. So people will figure out adaptations to where if you do something like that, you'll no longer like waste your veggies, right? So then like effectively you've managed to adapt. So is that a cure? I'm not sure. I think it's just you learn how to live with whatever way your brain is, which has nothing to do with ADHD. It's just some people have to learn how to do that. Wow, then what is it about the duration factor in depression and ADHD? Yeah, so that's where things get complicated, right? So, our science is like, okay, but we still don't really understand this stuff too well at the end of the day. Like, we don't understand psychiatry anywhere near as well as what we, we understand, like, cardiology, nephrology, we understand these things way better than we understand the brain or the mind. I think the brain and the mind, if you even consider the mind a thing, are like the final frontiers of medicine. They're the organs that we understand the least. It's gotten to the point where, we can breathe without lungs. Like we have ECMO, extracorporeal membranous oxygenation. So like your lungs can be completely gone and we can still keep you alive. We've got dialysis, where your kidneys can be completely non-functional and we can keep you alive. We've learned how to replace those organs. Even to a certain degree, things like cardiac bypass, right? So which will keep people on temporarily, will pump your heart for you. We haven't figured out how to replace the brain yet, and we haven't figured out how to replace the mind. There's even debate on whether the mind exists. So I think there is some surgeon out, maybe in Italy or something, who's trying to do brain transplants or head transplants. Hasn't succeeded yet. How to learn how to, so Ultra Mega Pint is asking how to learn how to talk better when you have ADHD. My thoughts are often all over the place and it often puts me in embarrassing situations. Yeah, so this may sound kind of frustrating, but basically you got to practice. So one thing that you can do is write your thoughts out. So so this is the key thing. So a lot of people, okay, let me think about this. Let me start with the question again. This is actually a great question. How to learn to talk better when you have ADHD. My thoughts are often all over the place, and it often puts me in embarrassing situations. So here's the thing to understand about ADHD. When your brain is different, a lot of people are trying to figure out, okay, how can I learn to talk better? How can I learn something up here that will make my ADHD better? The key thing that a lot of people with ADHD don't get is that if you want to improve, you don't need to improve up here. You need to improve externally. So a lot of overcoming the deficits of ADHD has nothing to do with learning how to talk better. It has nothing to do with neuroscience. It has everything to do with external tools. So for example, write out your speaking points. How can I learn how to be less forgetful? You can't learn to be, maybe you can actually, but that's not actually what is shown scientifically to be the most effective way for people to be less forgetful. It's not cognitive training. It's actually using external tools like calendars, reminders, things like that. So this is what's really important. If you struggle with ADHD, you don't necessarily need to do the lifting up here. You can do the lifting externally. And for people who start to use those adaptive external strategies, the impact of their ADHD goes down in their life drastically. That's why even if you look at cognitive behavioral therapy for ADHD, it's not just talking about your emotions. It's literally a part of that is going to be teaching people how to get organized and how to prioritize. If that makes sense. So oftentimes I think the biggest mistake that people with ADHD make is they try to solve everything up here, whereas you should use an external tool instead, and then you don't have to fix it up here, right? How do you apply that when talking to someone in the moment? So a couple of different things. One is you can just organize your thoughts a little bit in your head, explicitly. So, if you train yourself to write things out before you speak, then as you train yourself in that process, you can sort of do it automatically in your head as well. Or not automatically, but you can do it even without pen and paper. So first I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this. The next thing, I know it sounds kind of weird, but in the moment, you can also jot it down. Right? In a conversation, you can just have a notepad and just jot a couple things down. It may seem weird, but it works well. I'll do that sometimes. I don't know if y'all notice, but when I interview people, I'm taking notes. And even when I'm having serious conversations with people, I'll oftentimes whip out a piece of paper and just keep track of stuff. It just looks weird. But over time, if someone asks you about it, or you can even offer a disclaimer and you can say, hey, I just want to keep track of a couple of things because a lot of what you're saying sounds really important. And then is it a little bit odd? Sure. But is it going to cause the negative impact that verbal diarrhea is going to cause to the conversation? Absolutely not. Especially if you're talking about something like a work meeting, right? If you're sitting in a work meeting and there's a live conversation going on and you're taking notes, no one is going to think that's weird. Just taking notes. And then there's also subtle things that you can do while you take notes to make sure that people sort of understand and reduces the weirdness. So I've learned some techniques. So I'm going to teach y'all a technique. If you're trying to take notes and you're not trying to make it look weird, here's what you can do. I'm going to teach y'all some. This is the closest thing to a social hack that we're going to do. So here I am talking to you, and it's going to be weird because I'm going to be taking notes, right? Okay. Then when I speak, because people are wondering, like, what's weird about taking notes? People are wondering, like, what is this person writing down? What is this person, like, what's going on? Like, what do they have on the notepad? So I'm going to teach y'all a little trick. So as we're talking, okay, wow, it sounds like, first of all, you've been through a breakup. Secondly, you've got a lot of studying to do. Holy crap, this sounds like it's really, really overwhelming. When you literally point to stuff on your page, people won't think it's weird anymore. They'll know exactly what's on there. And half of what people are anxious about when you write things down is like they want to know what you're writing. And when you just point to it like one at a time, man, that sounds nuts. Easy. And then it's totally fine. Just point at it. And then, because like if you're writing something nefarious, you're not going to point to it while you're talking. And then that also like is going to anchor you because you've got, because you're like, okay, first I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this. Done. Even if you lie and that's not what you wrote down at all. So Tone Bacchus, I completely agree with you that would be weird. But remember, this is someone who's got ADHD. They're not going to be able to point to one thing and say something else. Right? It's not something you need to worry about. Doodling little pictures. Yeah. Like, if you're like, you're taking notes, so follow them, right? That's the whole point. All right. So we want to take a look at a couple of posts. The ADHD TikToks are finished, my friends. Okay. So let's figure out which one to do first. Mod check. We have mods? Mods. Okay. Maybe, maybe not. We'll find out. Otherwise, Dr. K will have to do. Okay. Are those tips also good for neurotypical people? Generally speaking, I'd say so. Because I think I'm neurotypical. Who knows? I've never been evaluated for ADHD. Decent chance that if I had gotten evaluated as a kid, someone somewhere probably would have diagnosed me. But let's take a look at this. Okay. So which one do y'all want to do? I do not know how to deal with my free time outside of work, or I have no dreams or aspirations and I can't find anything that interests me. Mod check. Oh my goodness. Everyone's just typing in chat. Okay, I'm going to make a poll myself. Clip that. Manage goals. Sub-only chat. There we go. Poll. Okay. What first? Okay, so first one or second one? I have no dreams or aspirations. I don't know what to do with free time outside of work. Okay, so time outside of work. What do? No aspiration. I have no dreams, no aspirations, or dreams. All right, Dr. K is running the poll. Number 2's, okay, looks like number 2 is winning. Hopefully number 2 won't take so long, and then we'll be able to get to number 1. Oh, Wooey Tit is saying, get to 50-50. Don't do that to me. Please, please, please. Please, chat. y'all realize that y'all have a lot of power in this situation. Y'all control me if you want to. But then what do we do? If you could paralyze Dr. K, then what? Do we just do neither of them because we can't decide? It's like, you control me. Like, here's the thing to understand. You can troll, but should you troll? Right? Who really wins and who really loses when you troll? Always ask yourself, that's social tip number 2 from Dr. K. Is it worth it to troll people? Because a lot of times we just troll reflexively. Like, well, if we can troll, we should troll. Easy. And that's how we screw up our life. Because we end up trolling things that we shouldn't troll. Okay, so it looks like no aspirations or dreams. So let's talk about it. Troll equals short-term win. I'm with you. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about dreams, aspirations, and the nature of happiness. I have no dreams or aspirations, and I can't find anything that interests me. No experience in posting online stuff, but I will try to be as short and concise as possible. Generally, most people I know would say I have a pretty good life. I'm pretty happy with myself and my personality, have a good family, and a good group of friends. The only problem is simply that I can't find any job, degree, or field that I can work with for more than a month without hating everything about it. Being somewhat easygoing, I first thought that the solution would be to try out new things until I find something I can be happy doing. I've studied for multiple different degrees and worked a whole lot of jobs in my search for something over the past 5 years, but have never found anything I find even remotely fun or interesting. Every single day that I have spent working/studying so far have been nothing but tiresome and excruciatingly painful. In the beginning, I was motivated to find my place in the world. Now I'm beginning to doubt that it even exists. As a result, my mental health has been deteriorating to the point where I spend my time after work and weekends doing almost nothing but laying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I have no motivation to go out to meet new people or start a relationship, or other things that I actually want to do. I believe I might be depressed, but I don't want to prescribe any sort of illness to myself without talking to a doctor or psychiatrist first. Good, smart. Without going into detail, that is currently not an option, nor will it be for some time. That's sad and unfortunate. My current job was yet another attempt at finding something that might catch my interest. However, it has turned out to be the worst one so far, as I have to work a painful amount of overtime to fulfill my duties. I'm currently in contact with someone who has offered me a job within a new field, but I will have to endure my current job for almost a year until I can start working there. If it turns out to be as bad as everything else I've tried so far, I have absolutely no idea what to do. I can feel that I am quickly running out of gas, and I think my next job is the last attempt I get before giving up on everything and start living on state welfare while lying in bed 24/7. I have no requirements when it comes to salary, location, or status, only that I can find something I can enjoy, at least every now and then. What am I supposed to do? Keep searching until I inevitably burn out? Am I perhaps failing to deal with the problem at its root while focusing only on the symptoms? Any help is appreciated. So sometimes we get into this situation where we don't like any work. We're looking for our place in the world, right? There's a place. There's a U-shaped hole out there somewhere that only you can fill. And we go looking for it. And each thing that we try is not something that we find happy. Like, we're not filled with happiness and joy. And so we're like, okay, this is not for me. And it becomes excruciatingly painful because I don't enjoy it, right? It's not fun. And then people out there may say oh, but a job isn't supposed to be fun, right? You're supposed to suffer. Well, that's kind of true and kind of really bad, right? Because, if that's true, does that mean that I essentially have to sign up for a life that's excruciatingly painful? And there's something really insidious about that, because if we sort of assume that a job is not supposed to be fun, and we kind of write off peace or enjoyment or excitement in a job because we say, oh, it's just not a possibility, then we could be writing something off that's very, very significant, right? So what do you do in this situation where you've tried a bunch of things, and it's not just jobs, right? It's also degrees, right? Like, oh, I'm going to try to figure out what I want to do with my life, so I'm going to study this. That's not fun. I'm going to try something else. That's not fun. I'm going to try something else. That's not fun. And then what do I do? Like, how do you move forward? Because the more that you pull yourself out of the hole, because let's understand like how you get into the hole for a second, right? So as I try something and I don't enjoy it, I try something and I don't enjoy it, I try something and I don't enjoy it, what am I doing to myself? Am I getting any kind of positive reinforcement for going out there and trying? No, of course not. Every time I try, it's like an epic fail. Excruciatingly painful, as this person puts it. So then what is my brain doing? It's telling me, why are you wasting your time going out there and trying something? Like, clearly there's nothing positive that's reinforcing this behavior. So then as your brain is starting to tell you, don't bother, i.e. lay in bed all day, you have to use willpower to overcome a lack of reinforcement. So you go out there and once more into the breach. And then like, that's not fun. And you come back. And so then you, without any kind of positive reinforcement, you end up using willpower over and over and over again. Then you end up burning out and it becomes easier to lay in bed. So how do you overcome this situation? So this is going to sound kind of weird, but we're actually going to take an approach that's like really, really like, in a sense, simple, but quite profound and also quite old. We're going to dig into what is like the nature of happiness, enjoyment, pleasure, and pain. Like, how do these things work? And it turns out that there's actually one phrase which will sort of explain all of this stuff and also how to navigate forward, like how to move forward. So we sort of talk about happiness as something that's elusive and difficult to understand or like hard to find. Like, what is the meaning of happiness? It turns out that there was this guy named Patanjali who lived maybe about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago who figured it out. And he said one thing, which is yoga chitta vrutta nirodha. Okay? And that may be like, what on earth does that mean? So I'll translate it for you. Yoga, which means union. In this case, we're going to kind of talk about peace and contentment. So peace, happiness, and contentment comes from cessation of fluctuations of the mind. Okay? So when our mind stops fluctuating, that's when we'll be at peace. So the first thing that I'm going to ask y'all is like, when you're in an excruciatingly painful work situation, what is your mind doing? Chances are it's going to be having lots of thoughts. Okay? So this is something that we're going to illustrate using a diagram. So this is something that's like really simple, actually. But we just never discuss it. Like, we don't actually teach this. But even just out of this one sort of insight from a yogi, a meditator, basically, we're going to learn a lot about how to fix this, okay? So let's understand this. Okay, so remember we said yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, which means union or peace is attained by cessation of fluctuations in the mind. So let's understand this principle. And you're like, what does this have to do with finding like happiness in life? Let's talk about it, okay? So let's say that my mind is still. So when I'm enjoying myself, I know it sounds kind of weird, but there's going to actually be like stillness of the mind. So let's say that like I'm meditating, right? So when I'm meditating and if I'm in a good meditative session, my mind is still. When I'm watching a sunset sitting on the beach and just like vibing, my mind is still. When I'm like, let's say I'm go to a party and I'm dancing and I'm having a good time, like my mind isn't going to be filled with thoughts. Now let's look at something like boredom. So if I'm sitting somewhere and I start to get bored, what happens to my mind? My mind starts to fluctuate. Okay, so as I get bored, I think about this thing, I think about this thing, I think about this thing, I go over here. I start thinking in all these different directions. And if I dislike my job or if I dislike what I'm studying, what's going to happen? My mind is going to start thinking in a bunch of different ways. I'm going to create more fluctuations in the mind. And the more fluctuations I create in the mind, the more unhappy I become. So I have a question for you. If you're in this situation, you can do a simple experiment, which is when you go to a place where you're not enjoying yourself, notice what your mind is doing. Is there a bunch of activity in your mind? Because chances are there is. How long do I have to do this? Oh man, I can't believe I have to do this. This sucks. I don't want to be here. I want to be somewhere else. I don't like this person. This isn't fun. Am I ever going to find something? How do I find, what am I going to do if this doesn't work out? What if I do, how do I find this? Should I keep looking? Should I not keep looking? All of those are fluctuations of the mind. It's all not being at peace. So I'll give you all another example to illustrate this. Let's say my mind is at peace. And then I smell chicken nuggets. I smell some nuggies. Suddenly, I have a desire. And there's a fluctuation of the mind. I'm no longer at peace because I smell something. And then I start thinking about nuggies. I want the nuggie. I want to eat the nuggie. I want the nuggie. Oh my God, it's so good. And then if I eat the nuggie, what happens in my mind? So experiment number 2. Next time you have a desire, what does it do to your mind? It creates a fluctuation. It starts to create thoughts. I want a nugget. Am I going to be able to afford it? Is it healthy for me? Is it unhealthy for me? Oh my God, if I eat it, it's not good for my health. It creates guilt. I worry about finances. I've got food at home. So many fluctuations of the mind. Do y'all see that? And with each of these fluctuations, am I happy? Am I at peace? No. Now, what happens if I eat the nuggie? As I eat the nuggie, I experience enjoyment. My mind calms down. Right? Oh man, that nuggie is so good. I'm just sitting there, I'm enjoying it. So now we've returned to the baseline of the mind and we've become content. But only for so long, right? Because then what happens? There's another fluctuation. Now I'm unhealthy. This thought pops up and then your peace is destroyed. Do y'all see this? So potentially figured it out. Any fluctuation of the mind is going to lead to a lack of peace. Y'all get that? And so what tends to happen in our life is we have desires. We have all these desires. And the only way that we know how to bring our mind back to peace is to fulfill our desires. That's why we fulfill our desires. Right? So the problem, though, is that even when we fulfill our desires by eating nuggies, it's not a sustainable solution, because this will result, if we live a life of hedonism, we're going to feel empty, we're going to feel guilty, we're going to feel ashamed of ourselves. I'm not doing anything with my life. I'm going to feel like other people are like good and like I'm like a waste of space and all this kind of stuff. So even fulfilling desires doesn't fix it forever. The other basic problem with nuggies is like, if I eat nuggies today, what's going to happen tomorrow? Right? So even if I have nuggies for a little bit, and even if I distract myself through video games or whatever, so I don't feel guilty after eating nuggies, right? Because that's what we do. Because in order to make the bad thoughts go away, I'm going to distract myself. Tomorrow will come around and I will want nuggies again. I'm personally struggling with this because I had nuggies on Friday, and so I've wanted them all weekend. It's been hard, chat. Do you guys see this? So even fulfilling our desires is only a temporary solution at best. But here's the key principle to understand. Forget about desires for a second. Where does the happiness exist? Where does the peace exist? Here, 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 and here. This is what Patanjali figured out. So then the question becomes, is there a way to hang out here without fulfilling our desires? The answer is absolutely. And if we understand that, then we will be happy. So let's talk about work for a second. In the case of work, my first question to you is, to be happy at work, what are the parts of being happy at work? Is there an external component? If I find the right job, what percentage of happiness can I get? And is there an internal component? What percentage of happiness can I get at work through internal work? So if I go looking for the perfect job, will I ever be able to find a job that will make me 100% happy? Right? So what is the percentage contribution of internal versus external? Like, is it 100% and zero? So my happiness involves finding the perfect job, or is it 50-50? right? Or is it 0, 100? What is it? So let me put the question to y'all another way. So one person is suggesting 2080. Can you, if I take a fixed job that does not change at all, is it possible that I can do something internally that will increase my enjoyment of the work or decrease my enjoyment of the work? Is that possible? So that answer, I think, is absolutely yes. So here's the other way that I'd put it. Here's a person. I've tried this job, this job, this job, this job, this job. They are all excruciatingly painful. Let's use a different analogy. I've dated this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. All people suck. Or assholes. This person's an asshole, this person's an asshole, this person's an asshole, this person's an... I've dated so many people. I keep on dating assholes. Everyone out there is an asshole. Where's the problem? Are they really all assholes? Do all jobs truly suck? I'm not saying that jobs don't suck, right? We're not saying, well, we'll get there eventually. We're not necessarily espousing that. My point is that if you're out there and you think everything around you is the problem, you can go look for the perfect job and who knows, you may find it. But my point is that if you are looking for an external solution, you've got to be super careful because it could be at least partially an internal problem. And in this case, like, I think that's the direction that this person should look. So this is what's kind of interesting, is that as we look to our own happiness within a work situation, we'll realize a couple of different things. So there's a difference between the axis of pleasure and pain and the axis of peace and suffering. And this is the big problem with society today, is that we confuse these two axes. Why do we confuse these two axes? Because of technology, because of dopamine. So we know that people who live hedonistic lives, if I just spend all my time chasing dopamine and I move in this direction, do these people live lives of peace and fulfillment? No, they end up over here. Dopamine puts you right here. Because we try to retreat away from pain, right? Now, are there cases, let's think about this. Like, are there cases where you can feel at peace with yourself even if you're struggling? Sure, absolutely. So, for example, when I was in medical school, I helped women give birth. And that's an experience that is excruciatingly painful. And yet, luckily, most women that I worked with, I would put childbirth up here. I'd ask them, would you do it again if you couldn't? They're like, absolutely. Well, that's kind of interesting. Sometimes they do it again. Sometimes they deliver a second baby, a third baby, fourth baby, right? So it's actually possible, like, to have up here be up here. And so then the question is, well, what dictates whether something is, if we're sort of saying that the axis of peace and pleasure is different from the axis, pain and pleasure is different from the axis of peace and suffering, like, how do we move along this axis? And that's where we go back to this. Cessation of fluctuations of the mind. And I've experienced this myself, not childbirth, but like, for example, when I'm on call. Being on call for 30 hours and working in a hospital is not fun. It's not like playing video games is fun. But the problem is that when I do a bunch of dopaminergic stuff, I end up here. Being on call is in this direction. And then there's other stuff, right? Like there's like going on vacation with my family, which is actually up here. Right? So that's like fulfilling and it's fun. There are even times where gaming can be up here. Like it depends on when you're doing it, right? And there are times where there's like pain, there's stuff down here too. Absolutely. So if you're in this situation, like the first thing to really think about is what axis are you chasing? Because when I hear I don't enjoy my job, I think they're looking for this. So you're moving in this, you're trying to find a job that is like dopaminergic. And if you're trying to find a job that's dopaminergic, you can keep looking out there, but I hate to break it to you, but no job is going to be able to compete with this. No job will be able to compete with this. And so you're looking to get peace out of dopaminergic jobs. That ain't going to happen. Now, you can find a job that you enjoy, you find more pleasurable, but it still won't bring you peace. Peace is about cessation of fluctuations of the mind. Okay? So then the question becomes, okay, how do I stop the fluctuations of my mind? And so that's where I'd really start by like going back to this experiment, which is like, what is it that you don't enjoy about your job? What is it that is excruciatingly painful about your job? Chances are it's some kind of thought. I find this boring. I'm not having fun. This is not what I expected. It's not living up to my expectations. Right? It's like, what's going to be excruciatingly painful? I mean, I don't know, maybe your job is physically painful, so that's a whole different ballgame. But chances are what people find excruciatingly boring or painful about their job is like up here. And so that's where you can control how you react up here. You can absolutely do it. So there are tasks that you can enjoy or not enjoy, and like you can cultivate that sort of internal enjoyment. How do you do that? With detachment. So this is what I'd say is that if you're in this kind of situation, are you looking for a dopaminergic hit from your job? Just ask yourself that question. If the answer is yes, then like ask yourself, how reasonable is that? And this is also where I sort of recommend tolerance, right? So don't give in to your mind, because your mind is like, oh, this isn't as fun as gaming. Like, screw this. And so then the question is, do you want your mind to dictate your actions? Does your mind need to be satisfied in order for you to go to work? Because if it is, then you're screwed. Because then if your mind is satisfied, then you luck out. And if your mind is not satisfied, then you're unlucky. And the nature of the mind is to be fluctuant. I don't know how to say this, but if you're relying on your mind, then like the mind doesn't stay happy from one thing over and over and over again. That's just not how it works. Right? You can't play one video game for the rest of your life. Maybe people who play chess are the exception. So it does happen, I suppose. But even within chess, there's variety, right? You're not playing the same person over and over and over again. So you've got to be super careful. And so this is what's kind of interesting is as you start ignoring the desires of your mind, you will cultivate detachment. And you can even practice that by ignoring desires that your mind has. If you want nuggies, no more nuggies. For how long? For a year, for a decade. So between the ages of 21 and 31 abouts, I basically gave up one of my favorite things. And I was like, just not going to get it. Just not going to get it. And every time I wanted it, I was like, yeah, we're just not going to do that. And my mind would like squirm. It'd be like, why not? What's the harm? Why are you doing this? When is it going to end? And I'd just be like, yeah, we're just not going to do it today. We're not going to do it today. And then eventually the mind like chilled out. And then what I realized is like, I'm no longer no longer controlled by this thing. And then I can start tolerating unpleasant experiences. The interesting thing is that once you start developing detachment and you stop chasing the fluctuations of the mind, any job becomes more enjoyable. So what I found is that like something bizarre happened, which is that people are like, I hate this class. Like I hated histology, but I could still study for it okay. I loved physiology way more. But was it easier to study physiology? Sure, but I could do both. And what I noticed is that all my colleagues in medical school were tortured, so anxious. Oh my God, like I didn't know how to prepare for the surgery. What if the surgeon thinks that I'm an idiot? And it's like, I'm going to prepare as best as I can. If the surgeon thinks I'm an idiot, he's going to think I'm an idiot, and then I'm going to get a bad grade, and so be it. The most I can do is study for the surgery. Right? And it's bizarre. It's liberating. And the other really bizarre thing is once you start developing detachment or vairagya and not following like what your mind wants you to do, it actually, people may think, but then how on earth am I going to succeed at work? Does that mean that I'm apathetic? On the contrary, it actually means that your work performance improves, right? Which is exactly why places like Stanford Business School and Harvard Business School are teaching mindfulness, which is one of the ways that you develop detachment, because it actually leads to improvements in performance. And you may ask, but Dr. K, how on earth does not following my desires at work, how does that lead to an improvement in work performance? And I don't know how to say this, but like, imagine what your work would be like if you were completely free from your desires. You could, like, if you could do whatever, like, then you can just work for the sake of working. There's no inner conflict between, oh, what if people don't like my ideas? So I'm not going to do them. No, it's like if people don't like it, they don't like it. I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. What if there's no longer a conflict between doing what you enjoy and financial, like, compensation? Because remember, a lot of what causes us to struggle at work is internal conflict. Do I follow my passion, or do I, like, work at an airline and make like $150K a year as a programmer? What do I do? It's this internal conflict. Whereas once you're free of the internal conflict, your job does what the job is supposed to do. It's like no problem for you. It actually is absolutely liberating to no longer have internal conflict at work because of like conflicting desires. And so I know it sounds kind of weird. This may not be the answer that y'all are expecting. But if you're having trouble enjoying anything at work, and I'm not saying that tolerate bad things just because you're detached. In fact, once you become detached, you can recognize, oh, this is actually like not a good work situation, so I'm going to move. The cool thing is that once you're detached, there's no guilt around it. It's like, okay, this is objectively bad. And you start acting objectively instead of subjectively. Because when you're attached, you're very subjective. It's all up in here. Oh my God. And once you start to detach yourself, right, you gain distance from your problem, you will become more objective. And then you can start like making good choices because your mind is no longer tangled up. So if you're struggling to find the right kind of job because no job is enjoyable to you, you've got to start thinking a little bit about, where does enjoyment come from? Does it come externally or internally? And you have to work somewhat on yourself internally to recognize, okay, what does it mean when the job is excruciatingly painful? What is my experience of excruciatingly painful? Chances are it's up here. And so then the question is, does this control you, or do you control this? Because as long as this controls you, you're never going to find a job that you enjoy. But once you start controlling it, you will find that the enjoyment of all jobs will increase. And I'm not saying that don't be calculating. There may be some things that you still enjoy more than others, right? Because getting to enlightenment, that state of 100 and 0, is very difficult. But you can get to 50-50. And as you get to 50-50, it'll be a lot easier to find jobs that you enjoy. Once it becomes easier to find jobs that you can enjoy, then you've got options instead of like burnout and laying in bed all day. Make sense? Questions? Okay, so how do you actually do the control, though? Sometimes it seems I can, and sometimes I can't. Like, how do I increase that chance of being able to every day? So this is excellent question. The control is fundamentally achieved through awareness. So if your job is excruciatingly painful, do you even understand what is excruciatingly painful about it? What is the actual substance of excruciatingly painful? Because I will bet you money that the experience of excruciatingly painful is thoughts. It's just thoughts. This is a dead-end job. The job is what it is. It's neither dead end or not dead end. It may not have great professional prospects, but where is the pain coming from? It's from the thought that this is a dead end job. There are some people who will agree that this is a dead end job. There are some people who will agree that it will say that this isn't a dead end job. It's still work experience on your resume. If you work in retail and don't have an opportunity for promotion after 2 years, you still have 2 years of retail experience under your belt. You can go apply for somewhere else. There's an advantage to any job. But that's not the way that your mind sees it. So it starts by awareness. What is the nature of excruciating pain? Where does that come from? And then what you'll realize, it's wild. What you realize is it's fictitious. It's a mirage. right? It goes back to what I was saying about, like, I still remember on my surgery rotation, I was blown away. It's like, if I'm going to do like, I can study. That's all I can do is study. And either I'll have studied the right thing or not studied the right thing. There's some things that I can do. So I'll even go and ask the resident, hey, I've got this case tomorrow. Do you have any recommendations for how I should prepare? Resident is like, yeah, I would read A, B, and C. Okay. I go home and I read A, B, and C. If the attending asks me, if the surgeon asks me about D, and F, what was I supposed to do? I went and asked the person what I should study. Should I have ignored that? Is that the right move? And just study other random things that the person told me not to study? Because that sounds like the wrong move. And that's when you begin to realize that, like, all you can do in life is what you can do. And you can't get hung up on what other people do. Now, should you ignore feedback from other people? No, we're not saying that you live a life of selfishness and ignore other people. I'm saying most you can do is what you can do. Once you start to realize that, then you will start to control your mind. You can also practice through meditation. You can practice through, even to a certain degree, like tapasya, or even deprivation of some kind, right? So you can practice restraining your desires. So pick a food that you enjoy. Don't eat it for a decade. And then you may think, oh, but I can't eat it for a decade? Yeah. What, is it like you only like one food? No, there's like plenty of other good stuff to eat. You're going to survive? No, but like, I'm not going to be happy. Well, like, you eating the food right now, it's not like you're happy anyway. Right? Control your mind. And then notice, watch what it does. No nuggies for a decade. Watch what it does, how it rebels. But it's like, hold on a second, you've been eating nuggies for 20 years. Are you happy in life? Well, no, but I want it. I want it. So then the question is, okay, like, who's going to decide what you do? The part of your brain that's like, I want it though. Don't take it away from me. Yeah, it's just like, of course you're going to enjoy it. There's no question that you're going to enjoy it. But does it bring you peace or does it bring you suffering? How do you control it? With practice, with awareness. Meditate. Pay attention. All of these things. Why are you unhappy? Because I didn't get what I want. Okay. So is that going to be the criteria for happiness and unhappiness? Once again, let's be critical about it. When you get what you want, how long does the happiness last? I want the perfect wedding. I want a dream wedding, and I do not care what anyone else wants. I'm uninviting my older sister because she has lost weight and is trying to make me look bad. It's my perfect day. How long does the happiness from your perfect day last? Right? The really sad thing is that oftentimes people who fight really hard for their perfect day get their perfect day and are unhappy because of it. Even when Soul Munchies is saying that day, I would argue that not really, because I think when they get their perfect day, there's so much resentment built up. They get their desires, but they're not actually at peace. They get what they wanted, but deep down, they're fuming. And if they don't get what they want, they're resentful. So what's the answer? What's the solution? The solution is to be not okay and be at peace with not getting what you want. Fundamentally. I don't need perfect. I'm happy with good enough. And imagine what your life would be like if you were happy with good enough. Easy, right? Like, just imagine, like, if you were happy with a B. If you were happy with good enough. You're okay. You don't need the perfect partner. You just want someone that you love and that you can live a life of, you know, they don't need to be a supermodel. They don't need to be Swolgers. They don't need to make $1 million a year. They don't have to be of a particular race or ethnicity or religion or whatever. Like, If you're okay with good enough and you can just build a life with someone, like that sounds pretty good. The problem is that we're not happy with good enough. So we create our own suffering. So Scallon is saying, but that's also a desire, the desire for enlightenment. In the end, you're still obeying your mind. Excellent point, Scallon. Which is why there's a very important story of how Buddha became enlightened. So even if you're desiring detachment, isn't that falling into the same trap? Isn't it recursive? Because that's still a desire, right? So Buddha tried really, really hard to become enlightened. He spent many, many years studying under many, many yogis. So the last teacher that he went to said that you need intense, intense deprivation. That is how you attain enlightenment. So Buddha starved himself to nearly the point of death. And so a young girl was walking by with a pail of rice pudding. This little girl sees that there's a monk here who's like all skin and bones, does not look well at all. And she's like, hey, bro, do you want some rice pudding? You seem like you're really not doing great. And Buddha's like, no, I'm being like intense. Like the more I deprive myself, the closer I will be to enlightenment. She's like, you sure about that? Like, cause you seem like you're about to die. And he's like, no, it's like part of my spirituality. Like I'm so spiritual, like I'm going to deprive myself. And I certainly can't have rice pudding, like maybe even rice gruel, sure, but not something that's decadent and sweet and flavored with cardamom and saffron. Like I can't have that, certainly not. And then she's like, are you sure? And he's like, you know what? He realizes, he's like, wait, this isn't working. Like I've deprived myself to the point of death. There's no more deprivation that I can do if I don't eat anything. And he's like, you know what? Screw it. I'll have the rice pudding. Bring it on. So the girl gives him some rice pudding. He eats it. It's the most delicious thing in the world. He's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then he's like, all right, I don't know what's going on. So he goes and he sits under a tree. He's like, this is stupid. All of this is stupid. I've tried all this stuff. None of it works. I've been chasing enlightenment for such a long time and none of it's working. I've gone literally to the brink of death. I've studied with all these different yogis. None of it works. And he's like, you know what? Screw it all. I'm done with enlightenment. And in that moment, he becomes enlightened. The last thing that you have to give up in order to attain enlightenment is the desire for enlightenment itself. So you're spot on, Scallon. Very good. So now everyone's trying to be logicians at me, right? So everyone's like, but he wanted the rice pudding. So this is important to understand. No, he didn't. He didn't want the rice pudding. He was offered the rice pudding and he accepted it. There's a big difference. He wasn't sitting there craving rice pudding day in and day out, right? He just accepted what life offered him with joy. And that's what he figured out. He's like, just accept whatever life sends you with joy. He wanted enlightenment, but then he didn't want it anymore, and that's how he found it. Because y'all are correct that even the desire for enlightenment will keep you from becoming enlightened. Solar wing drive, but if the girl did not pass by, he would have died? Who knows? Maybe. Right? So this is where like it's kind of weird, but if things didn't happen in the past, would things be different? Sure. But the point is they did happen. And they do happen. And they will happen. Right? So existence is only one thing. So remember, so Barrigel is asking a good question. How would you react when a family member dies, for example? So remember that the axis of pleasure and pain is different from the axis of peace and suffering. So I don't know, like, but we know, for example, that sadness and grief is on the pain side, but you can still attain peace with the death of a loved one, right? That's what the grieving process is like, literally. So there's like, we know scientifically, right? So there have been tons of studies on grief where it's negative emotions that will help people feel good in the long run and be at peace. That's what a healthy grieving process is. It's negative emotions plus peace. And it's when people don't grieve properly, when they stay stuck in the past, when they stay attached to the loved one who passed, never got over them, right? That's when they suffer. And it's even in our language, like we know this. Is someone who never got over a particular, let's say, breakup, is that person going to be at peace or suffer in their life? Going to suffer. We all know that. Getting over them is the process of peace. And what happens is you get over them. That's what we call vairagya, or detachment. I mean, it's not one-to-one, but it's like, you know, in different languages, you're going to have different words that embody different concepts. Loblo Hall is asking, how come enlightenment came onto Buddha and never touched another human being till our days? How do you know that enlightenment hasn't happened to another human being? And how do you know that Buddha was enlightened? Is there really such a thing as enlightenment? Let me put it to you this way. So here's the way I would answer that question. Is there an internal process? Is there anything you can do internally that will bring you more peace and less suffering? Can we move 1% forward? Is it possible to change my attitude or thinking or whatever? Is there any kind of internal thing that I can do that will make me feel a tiny bit happier? Yes or no? That's the first question. If the answer to that question is yes, then the next question becomes, how far can you take that process? Can you become 1% happier, 2% happier, 3% happier, 4% happier, 5% happier, 10% happier, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 99, 100, 99.999, 99.9999999, 78.6? And then how are you going to scientifically determine what that threshold is? Because we know science is essential. I mean, you know, I'm oversimplifying here, but we know that, for example, meditation and mindfulness does cultivate particular attitudes that improve quality of life and people's perspective. Right? We can measure that. And then the question is how much? And so if you say, yeah, but you can't get to 100%, then I'd ask you, what do you base that on? Right? Like, why do you decide that it's 50%? Like, the number is completely arbitrary. So that would be my answer. Is enlightenment possible? Okay. What do you do if after paying attention you still act on the desire? That's okay. You're not gonna conquer desire right this second. It's okay. Right? So here's the thing that I would say. If you act on the desire, then notice what happens afterward. As you act on the desire, do you feel guilty? Oh my God. So this is where the more aware you are, the more in control of your desires you will be, gradually over time. Ooh, Dark Rage Fire saying it's also super subjective. What might be 1% for another person might be 50% for another and 100% for yet another. That's dangerous territory, because if we're saying that, if there's an element, if the difference between 1% and 100% is purely subjective, then achieving 100% is purely in your control. That's a dangerous implication. So Lucky A55 is saying, I want to numb myself. Yeah, that's because the only way. So here's the thing about numbness. So what does numbness do to the fluctuations of mind? Right? It stops them. This is why people want to be numb. So this is good. Y'all are doing very, very good. We're discovering like all this stuff, which is that when I have a fluctuation of a mind, like a desire or a regret or something like that, and I numb it, what does that literally do to my mind? It makes it go dormant for a time. But then what happens? It always comes back. And this is how people get addicted to heroin. Because it makes all my problems go away for a time. That's why we play video games. Failing out of college. This I know firsthand. Literally failing out of college. What am I going to do? I don't know, but it hurts to think about, so let me do another Mephisto run on Diablo 2. Because at least for those 15 minutes, maybe I'll get a Stone of Jordan. And that'll bring me a little bit of joy. Might get a Shaco too, that is correct. Right? So this is where, I mean, it doesn't work. Fulfilling your desires doesn't work. I've worked with a bunch of people like this, and y'all may know this, right? You can live a life of hedonism, and it'll give you pleasure. But even there's diminishing returns on pleasure, right? Like we need higher doses of heroin. We need like bigger and bigger yachts and bigger airplanes. And like, we need more. That's the problem with desire, is that our body builds up tolerance to it. Are you ever worried that video games could take over your life again? Am I worried? No. Could they? Sure. So I take care with them. I stay grounded in a couple of things, but I don't worry about it. Right? Like in my experience on a date, it's not like I wake up every day and it's like, oh my God, like what if the addiction gets a hold of me again? I don't think like that. Do you agree that when someone gets to that end, he'll literally end? Well, first of all, I'm not sure about a he, but I don't know what the question is. Isn't being in shunya better? So Sudarshan 817 is saying, so being in shunya is like a good example of bringing cessation to fluctuations of the mind. That's why it feels so good. Right? Because it's like we're free of all of that. Do you use TikTok yourself? No, but I'm supposed to start. I will. I've been instructed to start using TikTok. I think it's fair because here's the thing, like I got to keep up with stuff, right? I have to really try to understand this stuff. So let's see. Well, so people are saying, please don't, TikTok is scary, but that's exactly why I should do it, right? Do addictions require something that needs to be numbed? Generally speaking, yes, Benomen. So let's understand this. What is the most common element between all addictions? The most common element between all addictions is suppressing activity of negative emotions in the limbic system. The most common element. So even if you look at something like pornography addiction or masturbation addiction, what people find is that it's not actually about sexuality, it's about emotional numbness. So that's the most common element. And essentially the reason that we become addicted is because we are in pain and we have a very, very easily accessible thing that will make the pain go away. Even if it hurts our life in the long run, in the short term, we really need to make that pain go away. And it becomes so intolerable and we just reach for it. That's why we get addicted. Okay. How can one work on the axis of peace with relationships? Great question, but the axis is the same, irrespective of what situation you're in, okay? So let's understand this. What makes you suffer in relationships? What makes you suffer is desires and attachments. That doesn't change. That's the cool thing. Because people think like, oh my God, but what about happiness in this and happiness at work and happiness? And this is what's great about Patanjali is like Patanjali figured it out. There's an equation like E equals MC squared. And the equation that he figured out is peace equals 0 times fluctuations of the mind. And so many things come out of that. Okay, let's meditate for a few minutes, and I think we're at time, so this is going to be one of the times where we didn't get to the second post, so my apologies. But I feel like we've been vibing. So there's never any peace? No, there's certainly peace. Right? There's certainly peace. So we're going to try to get a little bit right now. So I think in... Okay, so we're going to do kind of like a meta meditation. I don't mean metta like kindness or compassion. We're going to try to figure out some of this stuff around peace and desire and happiness, okay? So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give y'all a meditation technique, but I want you to think about how to explain this. Hold on. I'm trying to figure out how to teach y'all an impossible technique. Okay, so I'm going to give you a technique that will hopefully help you cease fluctuations in the mind. I'm going to teach you something. I'm going to tell you to do it. The goal of this is to cease fluctuations of the mind. Now, there's going to be another layer to this technique, because what I want you to do is pay attention to, as your mind gets quieter, as the fluctuations start to cease, notice the correlation between cessation of fluctuation and peace. So I want you to pay attention to whether you feel more peaceful the quieter your mind becomes. Now, that is going to be impossible, because as long as you are paying attention to whether your mind becomes peaceful or not, you will not attain peace. That will remain, that goal or that desire will remain as a fluctuation. And so what I want y'all to do is play around with it. Stop paying attention, see what happens. Pay attention, see what happens. But even as you track paying attention or not paying attention, that is going to be paying attention. Does that make sense? So I'm giving y'all an impossible task. So let's do it. So the actual technique that we're going to do is sit in the space between inhalation and exhalation. Okay? And when I say sit in the space, what I mean is we're going to breathe, but I don't want you to hold your breath. There is a very natural inhalation to exhalation, and I want you to try to sit in that middle space as best as you can. Now, people may wonder, does that mean that I need to hold my breath? No, 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 no. We want you to try to sit in the natural space. So it's going to be like a wave where inhalation becomes exhalation, and the slower we go, the more the slope becomes flatter and flatter and flatter, and the flatter the slope is, the more space there's going to be for us to sit in. Okay? So basically, sit in the space between inhalation and exhalation. That's going to be the task. What do you mean by sit? That's a good question. Can't explain it better than that. Try it, and hopefully you'll figure it out. Okay? So, if you've got ADHD, keep your eyes open. Otherwise, close your eyes. And then start to notice the fluctuation of your breath. Notice that smooth slope between inhalation and exhalation. And now sit in the space. Try to envelop yourself. Inhalation is on one side. Exhalation is on the other. In the middle is the transition. And try to notice it as best as you can. And be fully present as you transition. We'll practice for about 60 or 90 seconds. You may notice thoughts arise. Let them go. Try to sit fully in the space. Another minute. Now go ahead and come on back. Return to the world. And notice how much of it there is. Where were we? Did y'all disappear for a time? Okay. Now, we learn a lot of interesting things. So, Beacon from Mars says that felt good. Jonathan's 1212 is saying that felt great. People are saying I feel dizzy. I took slow breaths. Irreverent Fox is saying, no, the thoughts are coming back. So let's understand here for a second what on earth we just unlocked. Do you feel 1% better than you did before this practice? You feel different, more than 1% better. And how were you able to attain that? Did you fulfill a desire? Did you get what you wanted? Did a worry go away? Are you reassured? If you're alone, lonely, oh my God, will I ever find love? Did you find love? Will my parents ever be proud of my accomplishments? Did your parents become proud of my accomplishments? How am I going to move out of the house? Did you move out of the house? I want nuggies. Did you get nuggies? You got more peaceful without the attainment of a single desire. And now we're going to go back to how we started this, which is I hate my job. How long did we do this? 2 minutes. 2 minutes, 120 seconds. If you were to do this practice for half the time, what impact would it have on your job? I don't like this thing, so be it. I'm not saying that you're going to start enjoying it. It's not going to become pleasurable. This practice doesn't move along the axis of pleasure and pain. It moves on this axis. So your job will still be just as boring. What's revolutionary about this is that boring will bother you less. It's not going to make things fun. But they won't need to be fun in order for you to do them. Actually, way better. Because imagine what your life would be like if you didn't need to have fun. If you could carry your peace with you wherever you went. What did we actually do in this practice? Sat in the space between inhalation and exhalation. By the way, how many times a day do we breathe? Every breath is an opportunity to sit in the space. Every single breath. How many breaths do you take in an hour of work? Any moment you slip into it, bring you a little bit more peace. So Burning Wrath is saying, but fun is fun. I completely agree. I enjoy me some good fun. And the amazing thing is that when it's time to stop having fun because there's shit to do, my mind is not a whiny little bitch. I still enjoy having fun. Right? Like, is this more fun? Like, I could have played Cult of the Lamb today, right? I could have. It would have been more fun. But at the end of the day, when I go to bed tonight, what is going to bring me more peace? If I had played Cult of the Lamb or I shared this with you? Right now, there are 2,041 people watching this. If even a single one of you gets this, or gets the first part of it, is even moved 1%, then like that's going to outweigh Cult of the Lamb. Is it more fun? No. But is it worth it? Right? Does that make sense? So this is my job. Can I craft it to be enjoyable? Sure. But it's not about having fun. I agree when people say jobs aren't about having fun. Now, you can have fun at a job. I don't accept that jobs are by definition not fun. Because I think y'all have proved that wrong, right? This is fun. I'm not going to be lost as much as I would if I played a video game. And like, you can craft a life where your job is fun. Like, it takes effort, but you can get there. Here's the thing, like, this is what's happened with technology, is we've surrendered the control of our mind and we've surrendered our peace to technology. We've substituted dopamine for peace. We've literally surrendered the control of our mind. When I use a device and it gives me notifications, what is that doing? It is taking away my control. It is forcing me, prompting me, right? And you may say, but they're not forcing you. It's my choice. You're not even aware. I don't know if you'll ever do this, but I have a Reddit app on my phone. And I'll say, I'm done with Reddit. This is a waste of my time. I'll close it and I'll open it up again. Literally, I'll close the app and I'll open it up right away, immediately. I'm not aware in that moment. We're surrendering our awareness, giving it away. And people are like, yeah, we'll take that awareness and we're going to give you some dopamine. And that's what's happened. We're all moving towards the pleasure end of the axis, avoiding the pain end of the axis, and we're sinking towards suffering. Reclaim it a little bit. I guarantee y'all, I know this is going to sound weird. So many people are suffering. Peace of mind is not actually that hard. I know it's wild. People make peace of mind sound like it's like some kind of mythological, like, oh my God, does enlightenment even exist, man? And it's like, yeah. I mean, just think about it. You can be at peace. It's not that hard. We meditated for 120 seconds today. It's not even in minutes. The amount of time is in seconds. It's in seconds. And it's not that hard. It's not like you guys have been sitting in a 4-hour meditation class that costs $3,000 to like teach you some advanced technique. It's just like, sit the fuck down and sit in the space between inhalation and exhalation. Someone's asking, what the hell does that even mean? Doesn't matter what it means, just do it. You're like, I don't know how to do it. Okay, my bad. We're going to try to teach you something else a different day. But some of y'all are like, I don't know what that means. You sit down and you do it and then you're kind of done. Right? Frozen TV dinner. But peace of mind is hard with hard problems such as divorce with kids. 100% agree. That's what's tough. There are certainly things in life that are very difficult to deal with and that will disturb your peace of mind. My peace of mind is not perfect. It gets disturbed as well. And at the same time, it's not as hard as we think it is, right? It's not like peace of mind is not some mystical thing that you attain at the end of life. It's something you can get right here and right now. And if we think about what happens in divorce with kids, the fluctuations of the mind increase, right? Think about it. What's the difference between divorce and not divorce from a subjective perspective? The fluctuations of the mind increase. And anytime the fluctuations of the mind increase, peace is going to be harder. Is learning to enjoy any food instead of chicken nuggets becoming more peaceful? Yes and no. So this is something that I can sort of attest to. I don't know how to say that. I'm going to try to explain it. So, back when I was like into tapasya and deprivation and doing all the esoteric meditations and stuff, I was like, okay, like if I can attain peace of mind, then I will enjoy all foods the same. And then I can eat whatever I want to. And I tried that for a really long time. I was like, all right, I'm going to eat like things that I don't like. And like, I'm going to train myself to like be able to enjoy all things equally. And I tried that for a while. And then I realized like, wait, this is stupid. It doesn't work. I actually don't like all things the same. And it's okay to not like all things the same. It's okay to have desires. It's okay to gratify desires. And it's actually kind of silly and absurd to beat myself up for not liking all things the same. And then I let it go. I was like, it's silly. Why am I so hard on myself? Why am I trying to achieve so much? I'm going to become enlightened, have all power over desire in the universe. I will be a master of the self, and all things will be equal in my mind. I will become a yogi. I will be so strong and awesome and powerful. It's idiocy. I just don't like all things the same, and that's okay. When I get things that I like, I'm going to enjoy them. And when I don't get things that I like, I will be upset. So be it. Part of life is being upset. What, am I expecting life to be perfect? And then once you kind of hit that level, it's like, all right. Is it perfect? No. but it helps a lot. And then sometimes what I do is I play with my desires. Like, what, you want nuggies today? Are we going to get them? What if we say no? It's like, no, I want nuggies. It's like, okay, well, can I resist today? And then it almost becomes like a game in your mind. It no longer becomes a struggle. It's like, can I resist today? And when you give in, it's like, all right, here are the nuggies. Was it worth it? It's like, damn right it was worth it. I think I may have to get nuggies after stream now. But yeah, so that's the thing, right? So self-improvement, like, well said, Racetam. So like, so much of self-improvement is about bullying yourself. It's like, you don't have to. You can just be a little bit more chill about it, right? You can lean on absurdity. It's like, okay, who's going to win today, me or my mind? And then sometimes I'll wake up and I'll be like, you know what? My mind has been winning a little bit too much. We got to like put that shit in check. But sometimes your mind gets, it's like, it's life, right? That's life. It's the whole span of things. And it's okay to be upset. It's okay to lose control of your mind. And once you accept all of that, then it's like, it's bizarre because even when you lose control of your mind, you're still at peace. Some corner of you is still at peace. Because you know that to be human is to not be perfect. And why am I expecting perfection from myself? Right? And the bizarre thing is that the less perfection you start, the less you expect perfection from yourself, the more you move towards perfection. It's bizarre. All right, who are we going to raid? Thank you very much for the gifted subs, Satine Rose. How can I start controlling my gaming addiction? Felix Joe Mama is asking. So I would start a couple things. One is you can absolutely see a therapist or psychiatrist or someone like that if you really have an addiction. Coaching program does actually help people build better video game habits. So I think if it is clinically at the level of an addiction, you should probably see a licensed professional. If you're not sure if it rises to the level of a clinical addiction, you should see a licensed professional. Then the last thing is that just be aware, right? There are two last things. One is be aware of why you play the game, like what causes you to play the game. The other thing that I would say is very concretely, delay. Delay by between 1 and 4 hours. So a big part of like overcoming gaming addiction is just not starting it right away. And then like do some stuff. And then like start playing. Man versus game. Yummy TV. Okay, we'll raid Yummy TV. WoW? Y'all want to raid WoW? Thanks for the Dark Lord Weenay. Thanks for the prime sub. Okay, Yummy TV. Oh, if Grubby is, let's raid Grubby. Playing War 3. Okay, we're gonna raid Grubby. I've been enjoying a lot of Grubby's content recently. Is it possible to 1v1 only mid Dota 2? What does that mean? Heir of Hades is saying, how do you find the right therapist? I think we have a video about that on YouTube, so check that out, Heir of Hades. Or ask on Discord. I think we've got some resources around that. We'll see y'all on Wednesday, everybody. Take care. I feel like Al Infinity Live, we have that already somewhere. Take care, everybody.